This is a scripted dialogue based on informal debates I've had with a number of conservative Christians. It's not verbatim because none of them want it to be recorded, but it does accurately reflect their responses to my criticisms of Christianity. I plan to post other such conversations, each covering one of the key issues by which one can decide whether Christianity is true or not. The dialogues consist of a composite of the people I talk to, so at times you'll find the Christian more congenial, at other times more antagonistic. An intervening God.
You may not believe in prayer. I do. Let me tell you what happened to me once when I was in Russia on a missionary trip. And you can believe this or not, but I'm telling you this did happen. I've been to Russia about 25 times.
25 times? Wow, you must be tired.
I see this experience as the hand of God. Years ago, I was there with a group of missionaries, and I was in charge of the transportation. After we were done, I figured we could save money if we went to the airport by subway. When our guide realized what I had planned, he pulled me aside and told me that that was a big mistake. It's rush hour at that time, and we would never make it to the airport in time. So this was a desperate situation for our group and for me. I prayed to God for some solution. As it happened, right near us, a bus had just let off a whole group of travelers and was sitting there empty with just the driver in it. I went up to the driver and I asked him if he would take us to the airport. I would pay him a fair price. He said, no way, out of the question. We don't do things that way. I didn't know what to do. I prayed some more, then I went back to the driver and I asked again. And he finally relented and said, well, okay. I think God was looking out for us.
So that convinces you of the power of prayer? It wouldn't convince me. People do change their minds. Good luck sometimes happens. It doesn't mean God intervened. What about all the times your prayers do not get answered? You just forget about those times, right? I remember reading about an incident in World War II. People were caught in a building that was being bombed, some big hallway. And most of the people decided to shelter by the doorway as the safest spot. But a group of Christians decided to kneel down in a circle at the center of the building and pray instead. They were all killed, and the people by the door survived. So, to me, some individual desired outcome or some individual undesired outcome after prayer doesn't prove anything. Moving a mountain by faith. Jesus says that with a little faith you can move a literal mountain.
But see, that's not the point of the passage, having faith that you can literally move a mountain. The point is to place our faith in the Lord.
But regardless of what the bigger general point is, the specific point Jesus makes is that people can move mountains by faith. And you cannot do so.
Yeah, that's a hard verse, but it can be, but it's not like the point is, oh, if God exists, then you can move mountains.
I think that is exactly the point, the power of faith. That's what the words say. If you have faith as a mustard seed, you can do even physical miracles. Jesus is not saying God can do anything. He's saying you can do anything with a little faith in God. Can you make this cup rise into the air?
No.
You can walk on water, can't you?
No.
Right, you can't, but Jesus says you can. He said all things are possible to him who believes. That's not true. He's overstating.
No. When Jesus says all things are possible, he's saying there is nothing that is God's will that can't be done.
But that is a meaningless point to make, to say God can do anything. Sure, if God exists, he can do anything he wants. But we're talking about the power of faith, not the power of God. Jesus is not saying God can do anything, but that you can access the power of God through faith. But when I look at the actual world, I see that God does not work that way, answering our prayers, doing miracles. He does not intervene. He lets the laws of nature and people's decisions rule.
I think he does intervene. He continues to be involved in things happening.
Well, he's doing a terrible job. He hasn't stopped the war in the Ukraine. He hasn't stopped that. But you know what he did do? You know who J.P. Moreland is?
No?
He is a leading Christian apologist. He's written several books. His daughters at one point wanted a pool table, so they prayed. And just a few days later, a friend of his happened to have a nice pool table he wanted to get rid of. So he thinks God answered his prayer. What a wonderful God. He provided the Moreland family with a pool table, while wars are going on and children are starving. Do you not see how insane it is to credit your God with wisdom and love and answered prayers when he provides a pool table to teenagers but allows wars and famines to continue?
Yeah, I get your point.
Making a book levitate. Would you please make this Bible levitate from the desk through faith? Or just make this pencil roll across the desk. Can you do that? You can't.
I don't want to.
But Jesus says you can do that. You could easily convert me to Christianity and save me from hell by making that pencil roll across the desk.
I don't think that would be helpful.
It would convert me on the spot.
I don't think it would.
Yes, it would. I'm not going to claim it was a trick because I know you didn't have time to prepare a magic trick. I know you don't have an assistant hiding somewhere in the room pulling invisible strings or whatever.
If levitating that Bible from the desk was what was best for you and would lead you to faith, I think God would do it. I don't think it is best for you, and I don't think it would help your faith.
It would convince me of Christianity.
I don't think so. I think you would make some sort of interpretation or explanation other than God.
Like what? Would I say there was a sudden gust of wind? Would I say that you had that planned ahead of time? That you had a person hidden under the desk and it was some kind of magic trick? There's a lot of situations where it could be a magic trick, and so it wouldn't be good proof. But right now, since you haven't had a chance to prepare a trick, it would be excellent proof.
I mean, you've created a scenario where you again get to tell God what to do.
I'm not telling God what to do. I'm trying to get you to show me that what Jesus said is true.
You're saying, do what I say, otherwise I won't believe you. But you won't believe anything that he has said.
Well, I don't believe what he said about being able to move mountains by sheer faith or walk on water. I don't believe that. Now, I'm not saying, God, give me $1 million. I'm not saying, God, allow me to fly.
Why not? If you flew, that would be very objective.
Yes, it would be. But it would be self-serving rather than seeking spiritual growth. I'm not asking for selfish things. I'm seeking spiritual truth. I want to know if what Jesus said about the power of faith is true. And I've concluded, no.
Well, that's fine. That's what you think.
Testing the power of prayer. Talking about prayer, there were 2 times in my life, well, not instances, but long-term problems when I asked for God's help. I didn't ask for God to come down with a voice from the sky or anything like that. Just somehow give me a sign, some insight or answer to these 2 problems. And there was no answer, nothing. No sign of any sort. So I have concluded that if there is a God that exists, he is a non-intervening God.
What were those 2 experiences?
When I was in college, I was in a relationship with a woman, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not resolve our differences. And then the second situation years later when my sister was dying of cancer. Incidentally, speaking of objectivity, there was a major study called the STEP study, the study for the efficacy of prayer, by someone named Benson. It was done by a Christian group, and it cost over $2 million back in 2006. They studied 1,800 heart surgery patients to see what effect prayer would have on their outcomes, their recovery process. And it was like a double, triple, quadruple blind study. Some knew they were being prayed for, some didn't. Some knew who they were praying for, some didn't. And the end result of all that, of 1,800 patients, they found that there was no effect. Except a very slight one, the people who knew they were being prayed for did slightly worse. So that to me is an objective study, especially because the group that did it, they didn't want to find that, but that's what they found. So that is objective evidence to me that petitionary prayer does not work.
Can you send that to me? I'd be interested in reading it.
You can find it on Wikipedia under efficacy of prayer. If they had come up with different results, I'd say, oh, wow, interesting. But there's lots of books saying, oh yes, prayers work, here's the evidence, here's the stories. But no, personal anecdotes do not equal objective evidence. There's all kinds of phony books that sell well, because writers make seductive, subjective claims, and people want to believe them. I think UFO books lately have been selling well, and that's just nonsense to me. People love to believe all kinds of stuff. So you can make this book rise, but you're not going to because you don't want me to become a Christian?
That's not within my ability, no.
You don't have enough faith. All you need is a little faith. Jesus said with a little faith you can move a mountain. That's one of the big problems I find with Jesus. He overstated everything. He's going to forgive you 70 times 7 times? Not me. That's 490 times. If you do something 490 times, then you are clearly not sorry for what you did. Okay, I've made my point there. I once heard a story where a mother's young son was lost in the desert, and she prayed with all her heart, and they found the boy, and he was okay. She felt profoundly that her prayers were answered. But on the same day, in another part of the country, 3 boys were missing, and the police found them later, all dead, accidentally locked in the trunk of a car. Were their mothers praying any less? No.
If you don't believe in things, you'll never be disappointed.
I'm not saying you shouldn't believe in things. I'm saying you shouldn't believe that petitionary prayer works beyond ordinary chance. You know, you Christians always do that. You deflect from a specific issue by asserting some general truism as though that resolves the problem. It doesn't. You're just avoiding the issue. If I don't believe in things, I'll never be disappointed? I suppose so, but how does that address the question of whether petitionary prayer works? It doesn't. Blind obedience and Abraham. Jesus chides Peter for not having enough faith to be able to walk on water. But you can't walk on water.
That's okay.
Well, no, it's not okay. You have to say, you're right, you can't walk on water. Jesus was wrong.
The biblical story only makes sense the way it's told, from its perspective. If you want to tell its story or parts of its story from your perspective, it won't make sense. The puzzle pieces won't fit together. What you perceive is a little picture of what's going on. You're trying to put the puzzle together.
I'm trying to put the puzzle together, yes, and the pieces don't fit. I'm trying to make sense of it, Christianity, and it does not make sense to me. Jesus says you can walk on water, but you cannot. God tells Abraham to kill his son, but that's a puzzle piece that does not fit into a sensible worldview.
I'm not telling you you should blindly believe or blindly obey.
But Abraham blindly obeying is presented as a great act of faith. That is a puzzle piece that only fits into a religious extremist worldview, not a rational worldview.
Yeah, so let's talk about that one, because that one really bothered me when I was growing up. How can a God who is against killing and violence tell a man to kill his son? What does that mean for me then? Does it mean that if God tells me to do something and I believe it's God, then no matter what, I have to do it? What if God tells me to kill 1,000 people?
Right, exactly.
Which I believe has happened a lot throughout history. I believe people have done a lot of evil stuff because they thought God wanted them to do it.
Exactly.
If God tells me to bomb this building, then either God is cruel and evil, or he did not tell me to do that.
Yeah, exactly. 9/11. God did not tell people to do that. They thought their God did.
Yeah, so that's a huge problem. So over the years, here's how I've reconciled that for myself.
Abraham and obedience?
Yes. And I don't think it's easily reconciled. It's a difficult issue to work through. And this may not be satisfying to you, but the thing that helped me was realizing the historical context of the situation. At that time, Abraham lived in a society in which it was normal to sacrifice your children, the religions around him, the people around him.
Yeah, so the biblical God should have said, do not sacrifice your children to me.
Yeah, well,
I don't see how this line of reasoning is going to end up well for you.
not necessarily in a satisfactory way, but here's where I'm heading with it. So Abraham lived in a historical context where it was very normal and actually kind of expected for many of the religions in that area. And you mentioned the Apostle Thomas being skeptical that it was Jesus standing in front of him. You said Thomas was reasonable to be skeptical. But if the story is true, that's where it all fits together. If there really is a God, if he sent his son, if his son really raised Lazarus from the dead just a few weeks prior to this, literally Thomas was there and saw Jesus was there and said, Lazarus, come forth, and he saw a dead man come out. Now everything makes sense. The story makes sense. Thomas saw Peter walk on water. If all this stuff is true, he saw Jesus walk on water. He saw Jesus feed the 5,000. He saw miracle after miracle after miracle.
If he saw that, yeah. But he didn't. He didn't. If Thomas actually did see actual miracles, he would not have doubted. How can a human being doubt after seeing unmistakable miracles? It's only when he's seen dubious miracles, questionable miracles, or just heard stories of miracles that a person will be skeptical.
Put yourself into the story, because you can't make sense of the story if you don't believe in the other miracle stories. Like, of course, this won't make sense if you don't believe the miracle stories. None of it will make sense.
But you're arguing in a circle. You're saying, gosh, if you don't believe it, then of course it's not going to work. But if you do believe it, then it'll work for you. You're basically saying, if the story is true, then the story is true. That's not an actual argument for the story being true. That's a circular argument. You Christians do that a lot. You assume the premise is true in the first place, then go ahead and argue and conclude Christianity is true based on that dubious premise. I have no more reason to believe Christian miracle stories than miracle stories of other religions. Or UFO stories, for that matter. Keeping an open mind.
You mentioned 2 times in your life when you prayed and your heart was completely open to God. What were those circumstances?
First one, I was in a relationship with a woman in college, and it was extremely difficult. I just wasn't getting through to her no matter how hard I tried. It's a long story because she was mentally ill. That was a big part of the problem.
Yeah, that would be hard.
And also part of it was due to religion. She was a devout Catholic. And I had at that point decided against Catholicism. So that was an unresolvable problem for me. So one day after soccer practice, I ran out into the woods by myself and sat down under a tree and prayed to God from the bottom of my soul. Please, I'm asking you, God, give me something helpful, anything. And there was nothing. And then later on, decades later, when my sister was diagnosed with cancer, again, nothing. I didn't pray for her to get better, just not to suffer anymore, but there was nothing. No sign at all to indicate God cared.
My very first prayer as a new believer was, "Don't let my father die."
And he died, am I guessing right?
Yes, he died a month later.
All right, so that disproves your God.
No, I love God with all my heart.
But he lied to you.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did. Jesus said your prayers will be answered.
No, you don't understand. There's different answers to prayers. There's yes, there's no, and there's wait. And are we willing to accept whichever way God answers?
I'm saying you prayed for your father to live and he died. Jesus said when you pray, your prayers will be answered. Note that I was deliberately setting the Christians up here by using the word answered, because I knew what their response would be. That God does answer prayers, but sometimes the answer is no. I knew that's what they were going to say.
Mickey, no. It was answered. It was a no.
He didn't say that. Jesus did not say will be answered. What he said was will be granted. Granted. Jesus said they would be granted. Right? Read the words. Go ahead. Read the words.
You're looking at it from a limited perspective, but God looks at it from the perspective of eternity.
Then what Jesus said is seriously misleading. He didn't say eventually. He said, quote, whatever you ask for in prayer, you'll receive. Whatever is an all-inclusive word.
Life does not end here. If you look at God's answer to prayer and you put it only in the framework of our lifespan on earth, it means you are not seeing from God's perspective.
But he just told us our prayers will be granted.
Yes.
He said whatever.
He said, whatever you ask in my name, I will give to you.
Right. And you asked that your father not die, but he did. So he did not give you your request. Jesus did not speak the truth.
Anything that is according to God's will, according to his will.
But to add that makes the whole statement meaningless. That's double talk. I will grant you whatever you want, according to my will. That means I will grant you whatever I want, not what you want. It means that whatever happens is what I want. So that makes the original statement meaningless. It's an automatic out, no matter what happens. If a king says he will give the people whatever they want, and then adds, according to my will, the people will immediately know that this is just rhetoric, the same old double talk. The king is going to do whatever he wants, not what we want.
Mickey.
Yes?
It's important for you to understand.
I do understand. I disagree. It's not a matter of my not understanding.
Mickey, if you are judging God's answers to prayers in our human lifetime, then you are mistaken, because God does not look at time within the space we have here on earth.
Can I read to you what Jesus said?
Let me tell you, Mickey, do you know that when Jesus was here on earth, there were many sick people, and it was not every sick person that Jesus healed?
Right, so that means he lied when he said your prayers will be granted. May I read from Scripture, please?
He's not Santa Claus from heaven to give you everything you want.
But that's what he promised. He said, whatever things you ask for when you pray, believe that you receive them and you will have them.
He didn't say you will have them right away. He didn't say you will have them immediately.
You prayed for your father not to die, but he died very soon thereafter. Therefore, your prayer was not answered.
But from an eternal perspective, he is with God.
I had a Catholic professor make the very same argument you're making. He said, what Jesus said about prayer is true, because he meant ultimately. Ultimately, you'll get what you asked for.
Yes, our lifespan here on earth is like steam. It's very short. But God looks at things from an eternal perspective.
But that is not what Jesus was saying. He wasn't saying everything will be okay eventually in heaven in an afterlife. He was referring to prayers being answered here on earth. Matthew 18:19. Again I say to you, quote, again I say to you that if two of you agree on earth, concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them. If Jesus had meant eventually in an afterlife, though not necessarily in our earthly life, he would have made that clear. I agree with you that God's perspective on time may be different than ours, but I am saying that when Jesus made his statements about prayer, he was not preaching that eventually your prayers will be answered in heaven. He was speaking in normal human terms, what normal people think of when they pray. They pray for good things in this lifetime, not just in an afterlife. Jesus grossly overstated the power of prayer. Notice how the two Christians here deflected from looking at the actual words in the New Testament and immediately argued in generalities. That is a fundamental Christian tactic I see time and time again, quickly arguing in generalities and truisms and avoiding the specifics of a passage. Here is what Jesus specifically said. Whatever things you ask when you pray, believe you receive them and you will have them. Ask and it will be given to you. You may ask me anything in my name and I will do it. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Do those statements sound like, don't worry, you may not receive what you wish for in this life, but ultimately you'll be fine in an afterlife? Where are the words ultimately, eventually, in the end, in heaven, in an afterlife? They are not there. These promises of granted prayers are simply untrue. They are feel-good overstatements from Jesus, the religious extremist.
You see, Mickey, sincerely, deep from the bottom of my heart, if you want me to say to you something important, it's two things. Number one, all you have made up your mind about concerning God, put all that in a box and open your mind. Let me finish. Open your mind and say, God, I really want to hear you. And begin to ask God to speak to you. Go back to the Bible, and I suggest you start with the New Testament and read through it.
I hear you saying this to me, but I am not buying it.
God speaks in ways that many times we don't understand. Be attentive to the circumstances and the things that happen around you. And be attentive and say, God, I want to hear you. Speak to me.
I am attentive, but I see your God as a false God. Let me say this to you. After I read the Bible cover to cover when I was younger, I read it again in my late 30s, cover to cover. I said to myself very deliberately, no preconceptions this time. Forget everything you've thought so far. Read it fresh. Have an open heart, an open mind to everything. I started reading it again, and not far into Genesis, things just jumped right out at me. Whoa, this is not right. This is wrong. This is evil. This is horrible wisdom. This is human beings speaking, not the real God. This is irrational, immoral, human stuff. So I have listened, and the answer is that this isn't the true God. And how about you? Why don't you read the Bible with an open mind instead of with your presumption that it's true in the first place?
From all you've shared here, I will say to myself, you don't have a full conception of the God of the Bible.
Yes, I do. He's mean, he's nasty, he's contradictory, he's immoral.
You see, you're being very judgmental.
Yes, appropriately judgmental. I can give you the evidence. You want the evidence? Just read the Bible. Read the Old Testament. And all the God-directed violence in it. Read it objectively for a change.
You say the God of the Bible is nasty, he's mean. You say Jesus lied.
Right. He said you can move a literal mountain with just faith. That's not true. Go ahead. Show me what he said is true. Move this book across the table with just faith.
God doesn't do parlor tricks for our amusement.
Oh, you've got to dodge for everything. This isn't for our amusement. It's for our sincere edification. The Bible says test all things, does it not? In 1 Kings 18:19-40, there is a telling story of God's prophet Elijah testing God successfully. Elijah calls upon the people to settle their religious differences by having the prophets of the rival god Baal set up a sacrificed bull and having them call upon Baal to send down fire for the sacrifice. The Baal prophets try and try and try all day long. Nothing. But then Elijah calls upon his biblical God, and the fire comes down to consume the sacrifice, proving who the real God is. So there you have God responding and proving himself. Unless, of course, this is just a blatantly self-serving myth of the immoral religious extremists who wrote it. Elijah then has the Baal prophets executed, all 450 of them. And Christians wonder why I reject their God.